The purpose of this video is to show you how you can expand a crosstab or a regular table to include formula cells similar to what you would create in Excel. You can do this by creating a freehand table, either by converting an existing crosstab or regular table, or by creating the freehand table from scratch. A freehand table also allows you to create table structures that would be difficult or impossible to create with a regular table or crosstab component. Let's take a look at a first example of this. What we'd like to do here is to create a new crosstab that breaks out information by category, as well as by region and by the day of the week. Let's see how we can do this with a basic crosstab. We'll add the crosstab component. Open the crosstab editor, add the product category as the row header, and then add the region as a column header, and then add the date dimension also as a column header. For the date dimension, we can choose to group the dates by the day of the week. We'll press the Edit Dimension button. And for the level property, select Day of Week. For our aggregate, we can choose the product total. When we complete the crosstab design, press Finish Editing. And you can see that we have a basic crosstab here that breaks out the information both by region and by the day of the week. So here we have the region USA East and the aggregates for each day of the week. And if we scroll to the right, we have the region USA West and the aggregates for each day of the week. Now, what if we wanted to break out the data by region, like we have here, and by day of week, but not within this kind of nested hierarchy? Rather, what we'd like to see are the aggregates for the two regions, USA East and USA West, and then separately, the aggregates for the 7 days of the week. There's no way to set that up within the basic crosstab editor. However, if we convert this crosstab to a freehand table, then we will be able to create that type of structure where we have independently the aggregates for the two regions and for the 7 days of the week, without nesting them within a hierarchical structure. To convert this crosstab to a freehand table, right-click on the crosstab and select Convert to Freehand Table. This crosstab is now a freehand table, and the editor that's available for this table is no longer the basic crosstab editor, but rather the freehand table editor. Note that once you convert a crosstab to a freehand table, you can no longer return to the basic crosstab editor. This is a one-way conversion that cannot be reversed, unless of course you've done it by mistake, in which case you can press the undo button to return to where you were. However, once you proceed to make edits using the freehand table editor, you cannot subsequently modify those changes using the regular crosstab editor. So let's use the freehand table editor to create the structure that we want. Independent aggregates based on the region and the day of the week. To open the freehand table editor, press the Edit button at the top right corner. And then you can see the structure of the table that we're creating in the schematic here in the large panel. The bottom left cell here indicates that we have the category dimension being expanded downward, as indicated by the downward pointing arrow. This means that the different values in the category field will be listed vertically. In the top right cell, we see indicated that the customer region is going to expand horizontally to the right, indicating that the two values in the region field will be listed side by side, and under that, we see the date field also being expanded in the horizontal direction to the right, meaning that the different days of the week will be displayed side by side from left to right. The bottom right cell indicates that for each combination of those dimension values will be aggregating the product total. To obtain the structure that we want with the day of the week next to the region but independent, we'll remove the order date dimension by removing this entire row. And we'll insert a new column to the right of the customer region column by selecting that cell, right-clicking, and selecting Append Column. Into this cell, we'll place the date field. Find the date field from the data source in the top left panel, and drag the date field into the top right cell of the table schematic. Note that the arrow is pointing downward by default, indicating that right now this cell is set to expand downward. Since we want the dates to expand to the right, the same way that the regions do, in other words, we want Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday listed from left to right, we need to change the expand direction for this cell. To do that, select the cell, and then select the horizontal option near the expand cell property. The arrow now points to the right, indicating that this cell, in other words, the different values of the date dimension, will expand from left to right. For the values of the date dimension, we also want to aggregate the total, just as we're doing for the customer region. So we can either copy and paste the total cell, or you can find the total measure and drag it into the table schematic. Note that if you do that, it assumes that you want this total to expand in the vertical direction. In this case, we do not want that to happen because we want this to be an aggregate rather than an expanding cell. So turn off the expand cell option for the total field. The structure that we've created here for this freehand table should now give us independently the two customer regions and the aggregates for each of those regions, and then the order date values and the total aggregates for the different order dates. Here we should take care that if we want to see those aggregates broken out by day of week, we need to choose the appropriate date grouping level. Click on the order date field and press the edit button next to the group property. Set the level to day of week. Press the apply button to change the date level grouping. Once the freehand table structure is configured, press the Finish Editing button and view the final result. You might notice that there are a couple of problems in the resulting freehand table. First of all, the days of the week are not displayed as days of the week, rather they're displayed numerically. And also the aggregates for the days of the week are not correct. They do not add up to the total aggregates that we see here for the regions. So let's take care of those couple of issues by going back into the freehand table editor. First of all, the issue of the aggregates. If we click on the product total aggregate cell under the order date cell, and then go to the edit button next to the summarize property, you can see that currently there is no aggregate method set for these totals. So let's just select the sum method, which is the same as we're using for the aggregates under region. Press apply, and now those aggregated totals should be correct and should add up to the total aggregate for the regions. The second issue was that the days of the week are not being displayed as days of the week. To correct that, we can click on the order date field here. We already have the level set properly to days of the week, so all we need to do is just select a format for that cell that will appropriately express that date grouping. To do that, click on the Format tab, find the Format property, select a date type format, and then choose a format that will express the date grouping in the way that you want. In this case, an appropriate format would be one like this. We don't need the month and the numerical day. All we need is the string representation of the day of the week. For more information about these formats, see the documentation or consult the Java documentation for what's called the simple date format class. Press the apply button here. So now we've got this date format applied. Press the finish editing button. And now the days of the week should be displayed correctly, Sunday through Saturday, and the aggregates displayed for the different days of the week should look appropriate and should add up to the totals that we see also for the regions, USA East and USA West. We can expand this table so that we can see all of the categories. And in fact, if we want, we can also add a grand total row or column. For example, we could have a grand total at the bottom here that shows the totals across the regions and the days of the week. We could also add a total column at the end that shows the totals for each category. To do that, return to the freehand table editor by pressing the edit button. We'll add a column at the end by clicking the rightmost cell and then right-clicking and selecting append column. And we can also append a row. Click in any cell in the bottom row, right-click, and select append row. Let's copy the product total cell and put it in the locations where we want the grand totals to appear. Here, here, and here. Add labels as desired by selecting the cell into which you want to add the label and typing in the text region. Let's verify that the totals that we obtain this way are correct. Press Finish Editing. And note that there are a few issues here that we have to deal with. First of all, the grand total row that we introduced appears underneath each individual category, so that's not correct. Let's see if we can adjust that by returning to the freehand table editor. Click on the product total cell here in the grand total row, and let's indicate that we don't want the product total cell to expand with the product category cell. So what we'll do is under the row group property, select none. For the product total cell under the order date grouping as well, in the grand total row, for the row group property, select none. Press Finish Editing. And in the result we see that the grand total row that we've added now is now the grand total for all of the categories and aggregates independently the two different regions and the different days of the week. The grand totals that we have in the final column do appear to be correct and provide the total for each category. In this case, each row would be the sum across all 7 days of the week, or alternatively, the sum of the totals in the two regions. If we wish, we can add a grand total in the bottom right cell here that will provide a total across the entire data set. Again, enter the freehand table editor, copy a product total cell into the empty cell at the bottom right corner. Then select that cell, and for row group, select none, and for column group, select none. This means that this cell, or rather the total in this cell, will not expand along with either the row or the column grouping, but will rather aggregate the entire table. Press Finish Editing. And verify that the grand total across the entire table is shown in the bottom right-hand cell. This is the total across all 7 categories. You can, of course, proceed to style this table as you wish. Perhaps add some color to the header cells. and add any desired formatting. Of course, you can filter this table using any of the available filtering components. For example, we could add a range slider to filter the dates. For example, here I've restricted the dates to a particular range of dates from March 2017 to March 2018, and the aggregates that we see in the freehand table now are just aggregates for that range of dates. Now in this example, what we've done is we've created a freehand table by initially creating a crosstab and then modifying the crosstab, converting it into a freehand table, and then proceeding to use the freehand table features to build up the structure that we wanted. You can also create a freehand table from scratch. I'll just illustrate that very quickly by dragging in the freehand table component. Click the Edit button either in the center or at the top right to open the freehand table editor that we've been using. Here we can build the table from scratch by simply adding the fields that we want into the table. So if we wanted to build a table similar to the one that we saw previously, we could add category as an expanding row header, by default expanding in the vertical direction. Add the customer region as a column header and set it to expand in the horizontal direction. Append a column and add the date field, setting it also to expand in the horizontal direction. And then add the total measure, turning off the expand cell option for the aggregate. Then, just as we did before, for the aggregates we would check that we have the proper aggregation method set. In this case, again, we'll use sum. And for the order date, we'll check that we have the appropriate date grouping level set. Press Finish Editing, and here we've created the same table that we did previously by converting a crosstab. Again, you can see that we may need to make a few adjustments, for example, to display the name of the day of the week and set other formatting properties. But now you can see that you have a choice to create a freehand table by converting an existing crosstab table or a regular table, or by creating a freehand table from scratch using the freehand table component. In many cases, it will be easiest for you to first build an existing crosstab table or a regular table and then convert to a freehand table. That way you'll be able to use the simpler crosstab table editor or regular table editing features, and then use the freehand table editor only for those additional improvements that you can only make using a freehand table. The previous examples did not involve adding any formulas to the freehand tables that we created, but simply illustrated that you can use a freehand table to create a structure that would not be possible with a regular crosstab table. In the next example, we'll do some more of that, but we'll also add some formula cells to illustrate how you can create new calculations within a freehand table. Keep in mind, however, that the easiest way to create calculations in a dashboard is by using calculated fields. To create a calculated field, simply right-click on your data source and select New Calculated Field. This gives you the option of creating a detail calculation, which is based on the raw data in the data source, or creating an aggregate calculation, which is based on aggregated data, such as that which has already been aggregated within a chart or crosstab in the dashboard. So in general, if you want to create a new field that you can use within a chart or table or crosstab or gauge or any other component in a dashboard, in most cases the easiest way to do that is by using a calculated field like this. With that said, let's go ahead and create a freehand table. Again, we'll do this by first creating a crosstab that's as close as possible to the table that we want to create. So let's begin. The table that we want will break out data by state, city, and category, and it will display as aggregates both the total and the quantity purchased. We'll open our crosstab editor, add the customer state and city as row headers, category as a column header, and the two measures of total and quantity purchased. Press the Finish Editing button to leave the crosstab editor. The first changes that we want to make to this crosstab are that we would like a super header above the category labels here that says simply categories. This is not something that we can do with the regular crosstab editor. So what we'll do here is, again, we'll convert this crosstab into a freehand table. Right-click on the crosstab and select Convert to Freehand Table. Press the Edit button and then add a new row above the existing top row of the table. Select any cell in the top row, right-click, and select Insert Row. In this row, we'd like to have the text category, so select the cell above the expanding categories cell and type the text categories. Press Finish Editing to view the result. Note that the cell that we added that says categories is expanded together with the different category values. What we'd like to have is just a single long cell up top that displays that text just once. To do that, again, open the Freehand Table Editor, select that category cell that we added recently, and then enable the Merge Expanded Cells option in the bottom left panel. What this does is it takes any cells that have been expanded, such as the category cell that we just added here, which expands along with the product category cell underneath it, and it merges those cells together. That will give us just one single cell at the top of the table. Of course, you can set any formatting that you'd like for this cell. So in particular, let's see if we can align this to the center, make it look a little bit better. And now we have this super header above the different category labels. We'd like to do something similar for these labels here, which label the totals and quantity purchased. We'd like to have these labels repeated next to each category column. In other words, we'd like to have the label total and quantity next to the business column, then again next to the educational column, then again next to the games column, and so on. Again, this is not something that you could do with the regular crosstab editor, but we could do it fairly easily with the freehand table editor. So again, press the Edit button to open the freehand table editor. Select one of the cells under the expanding product category cell. Right-click and select Insert Column. If we leave it like this and press Finish Editing, this will have the effect of just inserting a single blank column to the left of all of the categories. That's not the intention. What we'd like is to have a column that expands along with the categories. And so if we return to the editor, we can make that happen by merging these two cells here, the product category cell which expands and the new cell that we added to the left of it. Doing that will cause this column that was recently added to expand along with the product category cell. So select those two cells, right-click, and select Merge Cells. These two cells are now a single cell, which is an expanding cell that expands to the right. Take a look at the result. we now have this blank column expanding along with the category column, giving us the different category data. We'll use this new expanding column to put our labels of total and quantity. In this cell here, next to the total aggregate, we'll put the label total. And in this cell here, next to the quantity aggregate, we'll put the label quantity. This column here, which exists from the original crosstab that we created, is now superfluous and we can remove it. Take a look at the result. We now have this label column that appears next to the aggregates for each category. Labels for the business aggregates, labels for the educational aggregates, and so on. You can apply any formatting to make this look better. For example, you might want the labels to appear in bold. Now let's add a grand total row at the bottom that will give us the grand totals across all the cities and states. Again, open the freehand table editor. We'll add 2 rows at the bottom, so select any cell in the bottom row, right-click, select Append Row, and then again. We'll add a label here in the leftmost column that says Grand Total, and we can merge these cells here by selecting all 4 of them, right-clicking, and selecting Merge Cells. Incidentally, these are not expanding cells, so we would not use the Merge Expanded Cells option. This option here on the left only applies to cells that are expanding cells. Cells that you want to merge that are static cells, you can merge merely by selecting them and right-clicking and selecting the Merge Cells option. We can take care of the alignment of this cell later. Here, in these cells, we'll add again the total and quantity labels. We can do that by copying and pasting. And in these cells, we want, again, the total and the quantity purchased. Again, we can simply copy and paste. Click on the total cell here, which will be the grand total across all city and states for each category. And note that currently the column group is set to product category, which is correct, because we want this total to be independently computed for each category. However, you'll also notice that the row group is set to customer city. That would cause this total to be computed independently for each city. But we want this total to be a total across all cities, so we're going to set the row group to none. Similarly, for the quantity purchased, we want to make sure that the row group is set to none so that the aggregate is taken across all of the rows. In other words, it should be the sum across all the cities for each category. Press Finish Editing, and we can take a look at the grand totals in the table. If we scroll down, here's the grand total row, and here are the grand totals for each category taken across all of the different cities. Now what we'd like to do is we'd like to see how we can add a formula to this freehand table to display some interesting information. In this example, what we'd like to do is for each category, we'd like to add the percent of the top selling category represented by that category's total. For example, in the category of business, the total is about $8 million, and we'd like to know what percent of the top selling category does that represent. Is that only, for example, half of the total represented by the top selling category? Or is it perhaps 85% of that total? Or perhaps, in fact, business is the top selling category, in which case the total for business would be 100% of the top selling category. Let's see how we can add a formula to the table that will give us that information. Now, there are a few different ways that we could do this. The way that I'm going to choose to do this is by introducing a hidden table that will give me the top selling category. So I'm going to scroll down a bit, and I'm going to add a new crosstab table down here in an empty region. This crosstab is going to be very simple. It's simply going to be a list of categories and the aggregated totals for those categories sorted in order of those totals, so that the category that has the top selling total will be listed first. Okay, let's create that just using the regular crosstab editor. Category will be the row header. The aggregate will be total. And we want to sort the categories in descending order according to the product total, so that the top selling category will be listed first in this table. Press Finish Editing. And then what we'll do is we'll give this table a meaningful name by which we can refer to it within a formula, and we'll also hide it so that it doesn't appear in the final dashboard. So right-click the table and select Properties. We can give this table a name, such as Category Table, and we can set the visible property to Hide. So what we'll have is an invisible table named Category Table that contains a list of the categories and their totals in order from greatest total to least total. Press OK, and we have our hidden table. What we then want to do is we want to add a formula into our freehand table that will refer to the hidden table. In particular, we want to refer to this value that's in the top row of the hidden table. That is the total of the top selling category. So let's first see whether we can use a formula in the freehand table to obtain that value from a different table. Open the freehand table editor, and let's add a new row at the bottom of the table. We can add a label, for example, PCT of top, meaning percent of top category. And then what we'd like to do in this cell is ultimately display the percent of the top category represented by this category's total. But first of all, let's just see whether we can actually get the total of the top category by referencing that value from the other table. The way that we'll do that is by using a formula. So enable the formula option, press the edit button to open the formula editor. If you expand the component folder, you'll see that there is a table called Category Table. And if you expand that folder, you'll see that there's a property of Category Table called Table. Click on that property, and that inserts the following syntax: Category Table dot table. Category Table is the name of the hidden table. This is what allows us to refer to that table from within a script. And table is a property that provides access to the data in that table. In this case, the data we want is in the second row and second column of that table. The first row of that hidden table is the column headers, so the second row of that table is the first row of data, and that has index 1. The second column also has index 1, because the indexes into tables start from 0. So the second row, second column is index 1, 1. This script requests the value in the second row, second column of the table called Category Table. Press OK. Okay, there's the scripted cell. Press Finish Editing, and scroll down in the table to see what the value in that cell is. Right, you can see that the value in that cell which is the same for every category currently, is 8 million and some. All right, and that is the same value that we find in the top row of our hidden table, because that's where the value is coming from. So this illustrates how, within a freehand table, you can add a script that refers to values in other components. Now, that's not the final result that we want. The final result will be the category total for the particular category divided by that value. So, for example, for the category of business, we want the category of business total divided by the total for the top selling category, which happens to be business. For the category of educational, we want the total for the category of educational divided by the total for the top selling category, and so on. So let's return to the freehand table editor, and let's modify the expression that we created. Click on that cell, press the edit button again, and what we'd like to do is we'd like to find the cell in the table that gives us the total for the category. Expand the cells list, and you'll note that there are a list of available cells that we can reference in our expression. However, some of the names of these different cells are a little bit convoluted because they were created automatically. So, to be more confident about which cell we're selecting here, what we should do is we should assign a name to the cell that we want to reference ourselves. So I'm going to cancel the script editor, and I'm going to find the cell in the freehand table that I want to reference in my expression. And it's this one here. This is the aggregated product total for each category. So I'm going to give this cell a name that I create myself by going to the cell name property at the top here, and instead of this automatically assigned name, I'm going to call this category total. By giving this cell a name, that means that I can refer to that cell from within script by using that name. So now this cell here is called category total, and in my script on the bottom right cell, I can reference that cell by using that name. So let's return to the script that we were writing. Again, click the bottom right cell, press the edit button to open the script editor, expand the cell list again, and now you'll note that there's a cell called category total. So the expression that I want to write is category total divided by the total of the top selling category, which we already know is given to us by this expression here. Note that when you select the category total cell, it's prefixed by a $sign that indicates that this is a reference to a variable. So this is a reference to the category total cell for the particular category, and this is a reference to the aggregated total for the top selling category, and this expression will give us the percent of the top selling category for each category. Press OK. Of course, we can apply some formatting to that cell, either here or after we leave the editor, but let's just take a look and see what the result is. Press Finish Editing. Scroll down. And now you can see that in each of these cells, we have the percent of the top selling category represented by the total for each particular category. For the category of business, that percent is 1 because business is the top selling category. For the other categories, that value is something less than 1, indicating that the total sales for each of those categories is some fraction of the category of business's total. Let's apply a format just to make it look a little bit better. We can just apply a percent format. Select any of those new cells that we created, and just apply a percent format. Apply any other formatting to make the table look better. And if you wanted more precision on that percent number, of course, you could format it as a number and specify as many decimal places as you want. and add the percent sign to display it as a percent. So here we have 2 decimal places. This illustrates how you can use a formula within a freehand table to generate useful information, and we also saw how you can reference data from other viewsheet components, for example, from the hidden table that we have down below. Let's do a final example that involves both a formula and referencing another viewsheet component, in this case a slider. The slider will be used to make the formula interactive. Let's create a freehand table similar to one that we already did. We'll begin by using a crosstab component. And setting it up the way that we want. Now what we'd like to do in this case is underneath each total for each category, we'd like to have also the discounted total. That is the total minus whatever discount has been applied. The discount will be set by using a slider. So let's add a slider to the dashboard. And allow the slider to select a percent discount between 0 and 20%. We'll give the slider a meaningful name so that we can refer to it later in our formula. The slider's name is discount rate. We can apply a percent format to the slider to make it look a little bit better. Now let's add the formula to our table. Of course, first we'll need to convert the crosstab table into a freehand table. Right-click and select Convert to Freehand Table. Open the freehand table editor, and we'll add a new row below the existing last row. And in this row, we'll place the discounted total. The formula for the discounted total is going to be the original total for the product category minus the discount. Since we need to refer to the original total, we should give the total cell a meaningful name. Click on the product total cell, and in the cell name field, let's rename the cell simply as total. This is the name by which we can now refer to the cell in a formula that we place in any other cell. Click the cell below the total, select the formula option, which will allow us to create a formula to populate that cell, and press the edit button. The expression that will give us the discounted total is the original total minus the amount of the discount. The amount of the discount is the discount percentage multiplied by the original total. The formula will look like this. The original total is given to us in the total cell, and from that we want to subtract the original total multiplied by the discount rate. The discount rate is given to us by the slider, and so we can look for that either under the component folder or under the parameter folder. Under the parameter list, you'll see that the slider named discount rate is listed here. This formula subtracts from the original total the amount in dollars of the discount. Press OK. And let's see whether this is the result that we want. Press Finish Editing. This is not what we expected to see. The reason for this is that we are not allowing this bottom cell to expand along with the categories. And so the bottom cell that is meant to give us the discounted total does not have a valid reference to each category's total. Let's return to the freehand table editor and correct this simply by merging the category cell with the cell below it, which will cause our formula to expand along with the individual category totals. We can merge those cells together, press Finish Editing, and then we'll find that for each category and for each category total, we have also the discounted total. Let's format these to look a little bit better. And then verify that the slider can in fact change the percent of discount that's applied. Note that as the slider is adjusted, the discounted total changes, applying anywhere from 0% discount to 20% discount. To finish this example, we might just want to apply some labels to make it clear which total is which, and we can do this again in the freehand table editor by introducing a new column. That will contain the labels. This video has illustrated how you can use formulas within a freehand table to display useful information that would be difficult to display using a regular crosstab or a regular table. You've also seen how you can create structures in a table that would be difficult to create without the use of a freehand table.